once again to another edition of Pan-Africa Vision, broadcasted to you live from AFRIQUE Media. I'm your regular host, AFRIQUE, who will be taking you through exactly 90 minutes of the major news events for this particular week, in which we'll be talking about the AU and the ICC, noting that some political rows have been coming through as the ICC seems to be persecuting African leaders, or at least that's how the African Union has been making their complaints with the searches for individuals like the President of Sudan, Omar Bashir, Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya, and several others. After that, we'll be turning over to look at the situation in Egypt, in which we'll be crying this week, should we really say crying, over the death of some 400 people, though the Muslim Brotherhood is saying over 2,000 people were massacred by the Egyptian military on Wednesday. That, of course, was August 14th. And then we'll be turning our faces back to reflect on the recent presidential elections in Mali, in which we all do know that Boubacar Keïta has now been elected as the new president of that illustrious West African country. And then finally, as usual, we'll be settling on the Zimbabwe situation. We know that Morgan Tsvangirai, the opposition leader of the MDC, has put forward a petition to the Zimbabwean Constitutional Court, which ironically, though some people believe that Mugabe and the ZANU-PF controls the government, the Constitutional Court has accepted to see that petition through, also bringing now the postponement of the inauguration of the incumbent president, Mugabe. Those are the topics that we will be treating in this edition of Pan-Africa Vision. And to get through those topics, we have searched high and low, made phone calls, and of course sent out letters of request to find individuals who are enlightened. Those individuals, of course, who do see African news through the Pan-Africa Vision. And we were able to find a political analyst in the person of Mr. Tria Shrebu, who also doubles in the capacity as a journalist who has joined us. Mr. Tria, welcome to Pan-Africa Vision, sir.
Thank you for making me your guest this afternoon, Mr. Mbi.
Well, thank you very much. The pleasure is always ours. And as well, we were able to find a seasoned politician of the Cameroon People's Democratic Movement, that is a major political party, the ruling party of Cameroon, one of West Africa or Central Africa's nations. We found Mr. Mingole Alexander, who of course will be looking at the political situation and giving us his own analytic point of view in those countries that we did talk about. Mr. Mingole, welcome to the Pan-Africa Vision.
It's a pleasure being here.
And definitely now, as we do know our panelists, without hesitation, without wasting time, we do want to get directly into our discourse. As we did start this particular edition, we noted that we'll be linking ourselves up to the AU, that is the African Union, and the ICC, the International Criminal Court at The Hague. So we'll start first with this clip. Of course, our telephone lines do remain open. If you are capable of calling, you'll see the numbers from time to time on your screen, and you can join in on the panel as we begin analyzing our first topic, the AU versus the ICC. We'll take this clip.
The African Union has publicly accused the International Criminal Court of hunting Africans because of their race. The accusation was made as the AU summit drew to a close in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. African leaders oppose the ICC's pursuit of Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta on charges of crimes against humanity.
The process ICC is conducting in Africa has a flaw. The intention was to avoid any kind of impunity and so ill governance and crime. But now the process has degenerated into some kind of race hunting.
The ICC insists that it's an impartial body and is determined to continue with its case against President Kenyatta and others in Africa. Former Ivory Coast President Laurent Gbagbo is currently on trial, and another ICC target, Sudan President Omar al-Bashir, defied an international arrest warrant to attend the summit in Addis. The ICC has charged Bashir with genocide over the conflict in Darfur.
And now we have come back after that particular clip, looking at the AU and the ICC. We see the AU chairman, of course, speaking and making his point very clear. It seems like a witch hunt, or of course, maybe that is what the AU is saying. We do have our points. We do want to be objective. So I want to turn now to our political analyst, Mr. Tria Shrebu, with that question. Now, is the AU and the ICC in their row of discontentment, should we say that the ICC is impartial
Thank you very much for giving me that opportunity, Mr. Ambe. I will tell you that what the AU president is saying is actually true. We cannot say they are impartial. Time has come for Africans to really think and know what is to be done where and when. So for more than 50 years, Africans has been suffering in the hands of Europeans and other Western countries. So the ICC was created about 11 years ago, and it was aimed at filling the gaps that existed in the judicial system of the existing members' country. But ironically, African leaders, and me that is an African, has realized that the object of the mission of the ICC is rather to target African political leaders rather than playing a fair play in the members' country. And some of these leaders of the world that are out to fight for their personal interests and not of that of their population.
It's ironically what you're saying, if we want to really look at the facts and put them on the table. Now, we do know that President Omar al-Bashir has a warrant out for his arrest. We also note that Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya also is being sought, as well as, at least a good portion of his government, his vice deputy and several other individuals. As well, Laurent Gbagbo of Ivory Coast currently now is before the ICC, as well as Charles Taylor, who did pass through the ICC of Liberia. So those are the African leaders that we see strangely have been indicted or have passed through the ICC. But when we went to start looking at the situation, at one point, ironically, we note that we had the illegal war on Iraq. We should call it illegal because the UN did refuse that the war should go forward, and Tony Blair and George Bush went ahead. So I'm looking at this situation now. The ACC has actually ordered its member states to not heed the decision of the ICC, and it could create some loggerheads. We know that the institution is mainly funded by Western institutions, the UN, the European Union. So I want to ask you now, Mr. Mingole, looking at the situation, should the AU's decision to refuse that member states of the African Union recognize the verdicts and the orders given to it by the ICC, should we respect that decision?
Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity to express myself. At this point, we Africans, we were made to follow Westerners based on the earlier decisions taken by our forefathers who trained us to become followers of the Westerners. At this point in time, I think Africans need to take the law into their hands. I think Africans need to realize that it's about time they need to stand on the right. I think Africans need to realize that they can do without the Westerners. Looking at everything else, or other things else being equal, I will say the AU is on the right track to tell their fellow followers to disregard whatever the ICC is about to bring forward onto the table. And for that reason, I will say, yes, it is true, and you are right to refuse whatever the ICC is about to enforce into the members of the AU.
Yes, but now let me look at it like this, because let's say if we look at the Western point of view, to be objective, the Western governments are going to say that these are individuals who have committed war crimes. or who could possibly be found guilty of having committed war crimes. We see with Uhuru Kenyatta after, was it the 2007 or 2008 presidential elections, we saw a serious amount of bloodshed and violence in the country. When we start talking of Omar Bashir, everyone knows of what we should say the famous Janjaweeds, which were in international headlines for some time in the early 2000 period with the massacring of individuals in what has now become Southern Sudan. And it has been consistently alleged that it was the Sudanese government against the ethnic groups in Southern Sudan who was promoting such institutions, or we should say rebel movements, actually, as the Janjaweeds. Going into other situations, Ivory Coast as well. We see that the amount of bloodshed that followed the recent presidential election. So should we look at it from the point of view that maybe if we give support to the AU denouncing its leaders from backing the ICC, that we're going to instead encourage African leaders to become more aggressive, to perpetrate more post-electoral violence?
Well, I think that whatever African nations are doing at this present moment is what the Westerners are doing as well. Because if you remember way back, the Bush, the father, he pushed forward for the war to take place in Iraq, I mean to say. And based on that, no one, I'm referring once to the Western countries, objected to that effect. If we look at another Westerner, which is the French president, the former French president.
Yes.
He pushed forward in Iraq.
That's Nicolas Sarkozy, specifically.
By killing the president.
That was Libya.
Libya. Mm-hmm. These are facts. And nothing was done to either of them. Why are they, at this point in time, pushing forward that whatever African leaders tend to do is criminal? There, I disagree with them. Because whatever the African leaders are doing, they are doing the similar things in Western countries. So I would say, taking the law into our hands by doing what we feel is best for our continent, the Westerners should back off. The Westerners should leave us continue the same way we have, because that's the same way they did in order to become what they are today. The Westerner and the African continent are two different continents, and things are done differently. The morale, the attitude, the behavior are not similar. So I will say the Africans should be left alone and let them continue doing their things their way, and that they shouldn't be brought as scapegoats to be lynched by the ICC. Why the similar crime are being committed by the Westerner and they go free?
Yes, now let me put that now to you, Mr. Tria. You saw that Mr. Mingole brought out a question there. Why, essentially? I mean, if you were as a political analyst, why do you think the Western nations are taking this point of view now to, instead we could call it maybe witch hunt African leaders and allow their own presidents and leaders who commit the same crimes to go free? In your own analytical point of view.
Okay, before I get there, Mr. Ambe, thank you once more.
Yes.
What I will say here is that before we reach that point, we should find out to know why all these problems are happening in Africa. We talk about genocide, we talk about killings here and there, atrocities committed here and there. But we should find out to know if any ammunition is being manufactured in Africa. So before killings takes place, they kill people with guns.
Good, that's taking it deeper.
Are guns being manufactured in any African country? I would say no. All these ammunitions, are they manufactured in African countries? I would say no. So all these things are happening because of economic interest. And we know the people from the West, we know what they need from Africa. And ironically, the people that are the great losers are Africans. Because they are divided, they cannot come out with a consensus. Today you see the African Union, they are out contradicting the decisions of the ICC. Who told them to go and join this illegal institution? Why do I call it illegal? Because when you find countries like China, you find countries like the United States of America, you find countries like Israel, you find countries like Russia that are amongst the great powers in the world. They refused to ratifying this treaty.
That's true.
And so far, we have about 122 states in Africa, in the world, that are member states of the ICC, amongst which 50% of African countries belong to this organization. So there are certain things that our African state leaders should take note of when they are going into any kind of taking certain decisions. They should know where these decisions will take them to and what they will gain at the end of the day. So at the end of the day, you find Africans losing their properties. We lose the raw materials that we have. Our citizens are dying here and there.
Yes, we face political instability.
So why should they not gather in Addis Ababa to contradict or even withdraw themselves from these institutions?
Now, let me also add another question there, because as you're reasoning, I'm reasoning with you and understanding that the idea of litigation now comes into the play. You have the AU, you have the UN. The UN is the umbrella organization of the ICC. Now, you've signed 2 treaties. That's what we essentially see African leaders have done. They've signed with the AU, they've signed with the ICC. But now the ICC is acting, they're refusing a contract that they've signed to respect it based on having joined the African Union.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ambe. Again, what I will tell you is that the most important thing to be noted is
yes,
that...
I wanted to ask, who do they have to respect?
Exactly.
Really?
ICC is an affiliate of the United Nations, as well as the OAU or the AU is an affiliate. So it is the UN that takes the final decisions. And the United Nations accepted the ICC and all its terms. And as well as the African Union is under the command of the United Nations. So I really question to know if any decision will come from the gathering that took place in Addis Ababa. Because if the African Union is answerable to the United Nations, as well as the ICC, so the whole decision lies on the hands, in the hands of the United Nations. So we just wait to see if that will bear any fruit.
Good.
Yeah, rather than the United Nations accepting the decisions to continue to exist for manhunts, because I will call it manhunt against the African leaders. You know, we saw what happened in Libya. When France came in, they intervened. We can see till today no peace is existing in Libya. All the Libyans has gained is the fact that their petrols are going out, their timbers are going, and so many other natural resources are going, and people are dying every day. What has the African gained?
That is the question.
And ironically, again, you know, the Arab world is the most involved in, the most concerned in this disorder that is taking place in Africa. So why should we still give chance to all those misunderstandings and disorder that the Western countries are bringing into Africa? So time has come for Africans to think and take a true decisions that will help them.
Definitely. Now, I mean, with that point, it's very, very clear, Mr. Bengola. I want to ask you now, evolving this concept, because we see that the AU now is an institution that is subordinate to the European, not European Union, but the UN. But it's deriving its funding from the EU, the European Union, as well as the United Nations. If you go behind, just go on the internet and Google who is funding the African Union. You start to realize that they say roughly maybe only 6 countries regularly pay their dues to the African Union. And unfortunately, they really remarked that when Gaddafi was overthrown, that was a killer blow to the African Union, because based on the oil revenue he was able to take from his country, he was one of the main funders of the African Union. So killing him not only crippled his country, it's crippled the AU. So we have a situation that, like Mr. Tria is pointing out, we should question, is the AU a toothless bulldog? I mean, can anything it do actually have any foundation? Can it go to fruition?
Well, I would say the AU is a toothless bulldog at this point, for the simple fact that most of its revenue is derived from the Western world. And at the same time, I will say the AU could as well draw themselves from that situation by enforcing every African nation to pay their dues on time. We can exclude Western countries. All we need to do, we need to organize ourselves and make it a must. A must in the sense that it's a similar thing we do with African military. An African military where each time there's a problem somewhere, Africans are willing, every country in Africa is willing to send an army to defend Africa. And they want to drive away foreigners, which the Westerners, from getting involved. In the same way we can do with the African Union and the ICC and say, hey, listen, this is our thing. This is what belongs to us. We are the pioneer. We are the one to suffer. We are the one to progress. We are the one to benefit. So why not inject whatever we have? Every country has a budget in Africa, and if they really want to enhance that organization, it's easier for them to do so by putting a separate amount of money into their budget. And at the time of paying their dues, they just subtract that money and just give it to whoever is concerned. Yes, the AU is a two-player bulldog at this point because they lack financial backing. Nothing can be done without any financial support. But I think they can reorganize themselves. I think they can do better. All what we need to do is take a step back and reflect and think and act.
Yes. Now, this is what I'm reflecting on as you're bringing this point up, because I like how you're speaking. As a politician, you do have the Pan-Africa vision, essentially, and not just the name of the program, but when we start to evolve the foundatory principles of what the OAU was created for, before it became the African Union. It was the concept of what we know as the United States of Africa. This is an ideology that was created by even Popinists like Marcus Garvey. When we go back to the foundation of what is the Pan-African vision. But you see that because of colonial ties, a lot of African states are reluctant to get deeply entrenched in this ideology. I mean, I don't know if you can reason with me on that point of view, because I want to ask you as a politician, do African leaders really want to see a United States of Africa? Is that reality possible, or was it just should we say the vision and ideologies of our forefathers that it sounds nice to use to kind of inspire people and take some money? It's a Pan-African thing, and people contribute money, and then rich politicians and rich presidents, they swallow it, do what they have to. Anyone who can bite into the idea pays himself, and they're not really serious about implementing it. I mean, how do you reflect on the African state of Pan-Africanism right now?
Well, I think that Africans, the ideology of African United is a good concept. Our forefathers who brought this idea forward, they were very intelligent. They were very smart people. At this point in time, selfishness is pulling us away from that ideology and from that concept. It is good. All what African nations need to do is to unite, elect one single president, and every other president becomes a governor. I don't think becoming a governor in your state doesn't mean that you're a president. Our quote, the United States of America, a governor is a president of that state. He has all power. He has the senator. He has the assembly. He has the government is intact. They have an army, which is being directed by him alone. He has that power to say, no, my military is not going. For instance, Maryland governor can say, hey, my army is not going to go to war, and he's going to support the period. There was a time where President Reagan, when they were trying to increase the speed limit between Washington and Baltimore metropolitan area, Baltimore Washington Beltway, to 95, from 90 to 100, and the Maryland governor said no, because of the speed. He says no. All what Reagan did is just cut off the funding of the highway maintenance, and now, when it comes to the senator's floor, the senator said, hey, okay, you said no. Who's going to fund that international highway between Washington, D.C. and Maryland and New York? Not that you don't want to increase the speed limit. You pay for it. And that was Donald. His name, the governor's name was Donald Shepard. the Governor Shepherd at the time. Shepherd said no, he doesn't want to increase the speed limit because of the accident. All what the governor, the president said, he said, okay, I'm going to call down the funding. So you are the president of that state. So let African countries accept to be united. United is force. United is putting your resources and energy together and become the best. So I think the idea of our forefather of being united was a very smart idea. All what our present African president need to do is to buy into that idea and materialize it, and materialize that idea by accepting. It's selfishness. I want to be the president. I want to command. I want to be the one when I stand, people need to listen to me. That can be done as well. But all what we need to do is to come together. Every pride should be kept down. Once every state in Africa keeps its pride aside and elect, and it's going to be a rotation. And there are many ways you can do it. It's going to be a rotation from the south to the north, from east to west. That way, no part of Africa will be left out into the convention. So our forefathers had a good vision, and that vision can be followed. All what we need to do, we need to organize ourselves, and that will be done.
Yes, really, it's about egotism, because when you put the ego down, if you see the will, then there's always a way. That is what it is. You should be willing, and then it should be able to go forward because the idea is there. But unfortunately, in Africa, that's not what we're seeing continuously, because I thought maybe if we had examples, then maybe that was the issue. But we have the Nelson Mandelas. We even have the situation with Abubakar Keita. We'll come to that eventually. You see that the politics in the country, the politicians allowed him to go forward. Others are not willing to, and it's a very serious issue, because we're talking about the Pan-Africanism of the African continent. And incidentally, maybe a lot of people might not even know this. Right now, we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the OAU and the African Union. And incidentally, it's being commemorated under the theme 2013, Pan-Africanism and African Renaissance. And it's something that, I mean, you don't hear really a lot about it in the mainstream media. It's like the African leaders know, I've read the protocol for it, actually. They are mandated to use the state medias and encourage organizations to promote this concept. But if you move around, you see it's kind of quiet. Not everyone knows that. That's what the AU is doing right now. And we start to question that when the AU starts going up against the ICC. We see Pan-Africanism too is not being promoted clearly in the country. And you start to realize that institution is weak. We still realize that there's a neo-colonialism, that colonialism's gone. The African leaders still have their ties to their colonial leaders, which is why they're reluctant to back the AU. But every UN summit, you know they will be there. We still live in a state of neo-colonialism. And I want to ask you now, Mr. Tria, recognizing all of these factors, what do you really think African states need to do to be able to boast of a realization of Pan-Africanism and the African Renaissance?
Thank you very much again. We cannot be talking about Pan-Africanism or African unity without calling the names of people like Mugabe, without calling the names of people like Gaddafi, without calling the name of people like Obiangema of the Equatorial Guinea. Yeah. But within this time, we should also think about the number of years these African leaders has been in power. So we cannot talk about African unity when some of these leaders are still under the control of people from the West. It's wrong. So, like you said that when you go to the street, you wouldn't even feel as if Africans are talking about the 50th anniversary. When this OAU was created, some of us here were not even born. Somebody like me, they started talking about the African unity when we were not born, when I was not even born. But today, I was born, I met people in power, and today they are still there as president. What do they expect from the West? So if they are not there for their personal interests, as I've always expressed in some of the TV channels, so some of these African leaders should understand that the youth are out and they're having different ideas and can think differently about Africa. So some of these Europeans should take us to be their ball, and they kick and send to wherever they would like. Because if you are in power and you are in a treaty, you have a convention with a country like France.
Yes.
You send petrol, they give you the chance to remain in power for 20, 30 years. What do you expect? So nothing can come out. Like I said here some minutes ago, it's a group of clique. The African Union, the ICC, the United Nations, and so on. It's a group of clique because they know themselves. They are there, they are playing on Africans. They take decisions without taking note of the public opinions and the people on the street. So this is why I don't even think anything will come out from what is taking place in Addis Ababa, insofar as some of these African unions leaders are still there for 20, 30 years without telling Africans when they will leave power. Let's just take an example with what has just taken place in Mali. You've seen the former prime minister becoming the president of Mali. That is because of the good work that he did. So why should other African leaders, not only the president, but those who are within them, why do they not take the same example, work well so that they can go and come back? So when Gaddafi was killed, when Gbagbo was arrested, when other issues happened in Africa, this African this AU, the African organization, did not come out to take concrete decisions against this.
Well, they kind of did try in the Libya situation. I believe that it was the president of South Africa, Jacob Zuma. He led a delegation to intervene in the situation, but there was already automatically blocking from the French delegation.
Talking and taking actions. Talking and taking actions, those are two different things.
That's true.
Yeah, Omar el-Bashir was issued up to about 3 warrants of arrest. Mm-hmm. Has he been arrested so far? Because some of these African leaders have refused that he will not be arrested.
It's true.
And at the end of the day, he will not be arrested. But Gbagbo was taken from Africa. He is in The Hague today, answering charges. So the African leaders were there. They saw what happened, what France did in Ivory Coast.
And they stayed quiet.
Gaddafi was openly killed. Some of these...
we should say murdered then.
Yeah, he was murdered even, I would call that. So what did the African leaders do? They just spoke and they took no decisions. So the ball is at their court. If they want to be independent, they will be independent. If they don't want to be independent, the same scenario that is taking place will continue for another 50 years.
Yes, and I mean, if you really look at it in one way or another, you see that Mr. Trias saying something that, though it might seem difficult to say, but it's like it's just a ruse, you know, a type of dramatization, theatrics. You know, Louis Farrakhan says you've been bamboozled, essentially, that they're just hoodwinking the population to make it seem like they're up to something positive, but nothing is
We
coming
find
out.
Europeans moving in Africa very freely, but in Europe you wouldn't find Africans, be you from wheresoever, you wouldn't move freely in Europe. But they have free access into Africa. They do what they like. They take our raw materials with them, the timbers and everything. Today we talk about climatic change and so on. The climatic change that is taking place in Africa and the recession is being caused by these Europeans. And Africans are there. African leaders are there. They prefer remaining in power for the next 30, 40 years without even telling Africans when they will leave power. So what should be done to a situation like this? So time has really come for the youth, for these leaders to give chance to the youth to really take decisions that will help the younger ones that are coming up.
Yes, that is the situation on the ground. I don't know, Mr. Mingole, do you have any reflections, any comments there?
Well, as far as I am concerned, you mentioned earlier that what should African state do to achieve? What did I think? They think in order to achieve the true renaissance of.
Yes, because what Mr. Tria is saying, that to achieve that renaissance, they need to give the baton to the youths, essentially. You know, because we're going to get to the concept of Mugabe at last, but normally the argument is that Mugabe is old. That's what many people say. And then you have individuals argue that it's no matter his age, if he can, of course, give the goods. But then when you start to look at the ground of African presidents who've been there for so long, when you see the people under them don't receive the infrastructure, the healthcare systems, the employment possibilities, it seems that the leaders should go. And maybe the African Renaissance vision should be built on knowing that Nkrumah has come and gone. Mandela is still in the hospital. He's going to come and go. We had positive icons who gave a foundation and they've gone. But what they need to realize is that you won't be there forever. So recognize you won't be there to ever. It's like a relay race. Hand the baton to the youths. That's maybe how we should look at African Renaissance. I don't know if you see the youths having a play in the evolution of building the continent.
Yes, well, I do. I do. Well, Africans need to realize one thing, that after a while, need to let the youth continue with whatever they began.
Okay, let me just hold you there because we have a caller who has come in. We want to take our South Africa correspondent, Mr. Alan Roche, is online. Let's go ahead and patch in Mr. Alan Roche. Yes, Mr. Alan Roche. Okay, it seems that we're having some technical difficulties. You'll just continue and then.
Okay,
we'll
what I was saying is that in order for Africans to boast the African Renaissance, I think that the Africans need to be economically independent. They need to fight out to be. They need their independence. Beside their independence, I think we need an African industrial revolution. Beside industrial revolution, I think we need to create accountability.
Yes, that's a
Besides creating accountability, we need a moral revolution as well. If Africans become economically independent, the Westerners will back off. If Africans revolutionize their industries, if I take, for instance, Africans have a lot of raw materials. Africans have a lot of...
Okay, it seems that we're having the indication Mr. Roche is there. Sorry for interrupting you, but let's take Mr. Roche. Mr. Roche, are you there?
Hello? Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Welcome to Pan Africa Vision.
Okay, thank you. And I say hi to all the co-panelists that are sitting there.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm coming in about the reports that saying the African Union leaders are accusing the ICC for only going after the African leaders and not after the Western leaders. That is the truth. And when you look at the things, George Walker Bush has destroyed Iran, and the ICC has issued a warrant of arrest against him, but that will never be enforced.
Yes.
And you know the reason. He is traveling freely wherever, and no one can question him because he is American, he is Westerner.
Yes, they say he was convicted in absentia.
Sarkozy has destroyed the presidential palace. The presidential palace of Ivory Coast, mean the biggest symbol of their sovereignty has been worked above by a French military without any aval of without any authorization of the United Nations, and the ICC has remained, how can I say, powerless face to that. Instead, they have gone after Laurent Gbagbo, who was a sitting president at that time and who, according to every international law, would have been protected because he was the only one who had then legitimacy until proclaimed loser of the election and handing over the power to someone else. So if we look into it very well, the ICC does not work in favor of African countries. They are like kind of tools that have been instrumentalized by the Western powers to destabilize African integrity and African progress. Gaddafi has been killed by the same authorization of the ICC because he was the backbone of the African countries, the guarantee that Africa could go to the real emergency by 2014. So the first wave of African countries that were about to reach emergency at that time have just lost the hope. So it was about time that African leaders decide to stand as the advocate, the true advocate of realities. We must not become the puppet of the Western powers when we sit in offices like the AO. Without prejudice, I have realized that the other co-panelist, I would like you to remind his name. He might be a political analyst. He was saying something, stressing out the fact that African people have had presidents ever since he was born, and they have never managed to change those presidents. But if you see the history of the Western powers, let's take the case of France, for example. France has gone for more than 100 years living under dictatorship to realize the progress, because the change is about a vision. When you think that you have to make a change, you need a vision. And when you need a vision, I mean the one who carries the vision has to go with it until such a time that he sees that his vision cannot be distorted anymore. And then he will have groomed someone to follow with it. So the Western powers are really aware of that. But their own problem is this. Should Africa succeed to emerge, what will become of the West? And that is the real dilemma that exists in this point in time. So it's not in the interest of the Western powers to see Africa grow stable and become like they had been. Because if Africa become like that, they will become poor. That is why the things like geostrategy, geopolitics, they have invented it to manipulate the minds and keep Africa behind. So we mustn't fall in that trap, because today we have the privilege that Africa is the youngest continent in terms of youth. We have 70% of youth in our continent. And you know, the youth today, if they really think of having a better Africa tomorrow, this same youth that we should be thinking of what are dreams, because the Western powers made everything with a projection of 2,000 years based on the dream of the youth. Today they have no youth anymore to dream for them. That is why they have to use military might to stop us from growing. So if we can understand as a youth, we are a very huge capital to the world, we will be able to exploit the actual rise of China, because the rising of China is the only excuse for the Western people to be distracted from destabilizing Africa or from stopping Africa to grow. So let's allow China to grow as it is growing, because Western are disturbed when China is growing, and the youth in Africa must support their actual leaders who are doing well. I put it in bracket, who are doing well, because when the West started hating a leader in Africa, means that leader became a nationalist. And that is what we need. So we must use our capital, that is our youth. We must use it truly in the best interest of Africa. You will see what will happen. Thank you for now.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Rose. Thank you very much. And we see it really very clearly there. I mean, just to, before we do round up that topic, because we know that time is running out, I would just like to put this question on the table, gentlemen. Either of you could take it. It looks like the leaders of the African continents, their hands are essentially tied. But, I mean, breaking away now is the issue. But like we've started off saying, there should be a will. If we realize that the Western nations would crumble, perhaps in the next 10 or 20 years, if African leaders decided to say that enough is enough, this is how I'm going to start using my resources, irrespective of the fact that we know that our African leaders might face coup d'etats if they do. Funny things happen on the African continent when the West seems to get involved in the politics and they want a particular leader to be there. We'll get into the issue in Egypt next, which is a reflection of that. So I want to start off by asking clearly, is it that our leaders are just afraid? That's what I want to look at. Are they afraid of going up against the West and standing? I mean, is the AU so weak that it's afraid because it's receiving funding from Western institutions? I mean, is it just that they can't do anything to put Africa where we know Africa could be?
Well, if I could say one thing, I would sum it up by saying African nations, presidents or leaders are selfish. Selfish is the only word I can use. Why? Because they are out for their self-interest. They are out for their self-interest because if you just sit back and look and take a look at where the individual states are going, the individual countries are going, are they happy about it? Are they seeing prosperity down the line? Are they looking at it as something that they're going to be proud of after they have been out of power? All those things put together without any answer coming from them shows that they are selfish. And the more they keep being selfish, the more they keep looking things from the opposite direction, the more African countries is going to go down into the pit. It's about time they need to sit and say, we got everything into our hands. We can do it. How can we do it? They have expertise.
That's it.
There are a lot of expertise in African nations. African nations are full of intellectuals. Call them, put them on the round table, say, what can we do? How can we do it? When can we do it? With whom can we do it to get it accomplished? Once those questions can be answered by the panel who will be chosen, I bet you African country will be the best in the world. Because we have raw materials, we have labor, even though they think that we don't have, we have labor.
But essentially, you could say that we built the West.
We built the West.
Yes,
once we
built
stop,
the West.
once we stop, the West is going to collapse in the next few years. When we stop exporting, once we stop exportation, that's it. If you tell Ghana stop producing cocoa, don't export it to the West anymore, I bet you United States, France, mostly France who like the chocolate, they're going to die in the next few months. The market is going to be closed, the factory is going to be closed, they're going to be employment in the restaurant, in the hotel, and that's it. The economy crumbles. So we hold the Westerner into our hands, but we don't know how to use them. We don't know how to apply the best philosophy in order to come out victorious.
Yes. Now, Mr. Triel, are African leaders selfish? Do you agree?
Yes, I don't see it being any selfishness, because we cannot be talking again about African unity when these our leaders are having their bank accounts in France, in Switzerland, and other European countries. So they are doing what they are doing voluntarily to enjoy, to remain in power and die in power.
But couldn't that still be the same thing as selfishness? Because if we're putting aside the fact that it's not that they're holding a gun, the Western nations are not holding a gun and saying that you must back us, you must sell us these imports at this rate. But the African leaders realizing that it benefits him personally to create such relationships, it might benefit his whole delegation of ministers who go abroad to sign foreign contracts, to be selfish. There's no force. They know Pan-Africanism. They know Nkrumah said. They know Mandela did. They know Nnamdi Azikiwe did. But they said, I was from that generation, but I don't care. I'll sign my contracts, enrich my family, send my children abroad, and when I see the children on the streets suffering, when I hear of high AIDS rates at African Union summits, I just go and sit. I wait for my reception to eat a piece of chicken and drink a bottle, and I go back and say it's okay.
Yes, thank you. In the times of Nelson Mandela, it wasn't possible to find an African minister with about 20 vehicles. It wasn't possible to find an African leader with $20–30 billion in his account in Europe. But it is rampant today. That is the order of the day. It wasn't possible to find an African leader that could lead for 20–30 years. This is why I'm saying that if we should talk about selfishness, it should be personal selfishness. Why should I, at the age of 32 today, be talking about politics? And I find my father, that is about 60 years old, talking about politics. So politics begins in Africa when our African leaders are 80–90 years old. That is when they begin their politics. When they begin their politics at the age of 90, what do they think about the youth that were born in the 1980s? So this is a problem. So like I said some minutes ago, that it's a group of clique, be it the United Nations, be it the African Union, be it those of the ICC. That is a group of clique. Those are people that are there to fight for their personal interest. Why should the African economy grow when we still find people that are having a lot of billions of dollars in their accounts in these Western countries? And for them to continue being there, their account should continue existing. And when these accounts are existing, then the Europeans are enjoying this money, and this money comes from Africa. This is African money. They sell our raw materials, they take our timbers with them, they do everything, and the Europeans are there looking, taking no decisions to assist the Africans. That is wrong. Wow. So no decision will be taken, nothing will be realized insofar as these African leaders that has been in power for 20, 30, 40 years without being willing to leave. But along the line, we equally need people like Mugabe that has been able to say no to the Westerners, to the Europeans. So we need courageous leaders like them. So it's not even the longevity that matters, but we equally need youths that are courageous, that will be able to say, no, we have our timbers. No, we have the labor. No, we can do without you. Zimbabwe has been surviving for how many years today? Has they died? They are not dead. Look at a country that was existing like the Ivory Coast. They had no problem, but today they have all sorts of difficulty. Why should we not take example from countries like Morocco? People are talking about political challenges and so on. We don't see that in Morocco. You will look at a country like Cameroon. In Cameroon, we talk about the longevity in Cameroon, but we don't have any fight in Cameroon. The economy of Cameroon is doing well as compared to other African countries, because we still know people are not, youths are not employed in Cameroon. People don't still have access to good potable water in Cameroon, but we have peace in Cameroon. Like I said again some minutes ago, at the end of the day, Africans are the great losers. Look at what is happening in Egypt. How many people has died?
Let me just cut you before you start talking about Egypt.
Yeah.
Because with that, we do really recognize that we're also following time.
Exactly.
So before we do get into that topic, knowing that we're close to the top of the hour, let's get this next clip on Egypt, just since we're synchronizing to what you're saying. We'll look at the unrest in North Africa, and then we'll come back and we'll continue to evolve that problem.
Cairo's streets on fire. An ugly aftermath to a crackdown which has left hundreds dead and injured. Tanks and security forces were sent in to clear supporters of deposed President Mohamed Morsi from their seats of resistance. The interim Prime Minister was quick to defend the crackdown and play down any reports of heavy-handed violence.
When we see the right of expression has turned into a form of intimidation, carrying illegal arms, hijacking roads, assaulting public and private property, and crippling the people's interests, it's no longer a respect to the freedom of expression. It's an assault not only on citizens, but also on the authority of the state, which should be respected.
State television played throughout the day video of Morsi supporters with guns in Suez, and violence elsewhere. The Interior Minister said they were left with little choice but to move in.
They started to fire live ammunition and cartridges heavily and intensely in the direction of security forces, who continued to show self-restraint. The personnel deployed succeeded in dealing and addressing the situation with the highest degree of professionalism to end the sit-in without losses.
Mohamed Ibrahim said no live rounds were used against the protesters, but witnesses to the clear-outs paint a different picture.
He is saying lies. We don't have guns. We don't have anything inside. We found them attacking us. They are attacking people which are innocent.
As the death toll mounts, there's a growing sense of unease for many in Egypt at the actions of the military-backed government. But if those on the streets were angry at the bloodshed, so too were key members of the leadership. The interim Vice President Mohamed El-Baradei resigned in protest. The former senior UN diplomat and head of one of Egypt's main opposition parties said there were peaceful options for ending the political crisis. There are fears the upheaval's also fueling a sectarian crisis. A Christian church was set on fire in the town of Arish in the Sinai Peninsula as violence spread across the country. A state of emergency has been declared, and a month-long nighttime curfew is now in place in 14 Egyptian provinces out of 27, mainly in areas where support for ousted President Morsi has been strong. The president also instructed the armed forces to assist the police in taking whatever measures necessary to preserve security and order, protecting public and private property and the lives of citizens. It gives the military-backed government draconian powers to prevent anti-government crowds from gathering. But it's a step that could exclude a large segment of Egyptian society from any future democratic process.
Now, that is the situation in Egypt as we were able to see it this week. Looking at Wednesday, August 14th, reports started to come out that maybe 400 people had lost their lives. 464 was where I personally stopped following the death count. But strangely, the Muslim Brotherhood says necessarily roughly 2,000 people were killed in that staging between the Egyptian military and, of course, supporters of the former and ousted president of Egypt, democratically elected president, we should also be remarking, of course, Mohamed Morsi. And the situation is getting worse and worse day by day. When we thought maybe some resolution would come now to the crisis, it seems to be escalating again now with this military action, because the military has taken the stand. They say they want to come out and suppress the rioting and violence in the country, and they're blaming the Morsi supporters. Now, as we start to evolve this situation, looking at it, we want to question who's in charge of the country. That's what I want to start with by asking, because the military on one point comes in, topples a regime. They say it's not a coup, but some people are saying it's a coup. They decide to institute an interim government. Now the interim government is coming and sort of speaking like they want a state of emergency. We want who started the state of emergency? Was it the military? Is it the interim government? I mean, I want to ask you now, Mr. Bingola, looking at Egypt, as I know you've been following it, who's in charge of the country?
Well, at this point in time, I think the military are in charge of the country, for the simple fact that they made a coup d'etat, as we can say, because taking someone who is democratically elected out of power and isolating him somewhere, taking him out of the political scene is a coup d'etat. And that's one. Two, for the simple fact that they are the one who are dictating what needs to be done, when and how into the country, shows that they are in power. Thirdly, for the simple fact that they are the one now sending out the curfew, putting the military to kill innocent civilians. Entirely, we can all sum everything up and saying that they are the one in charge. Something, if you would permit me,
yes.
I thought the Westerners were going to put the eye onto very closely, because if you permit to quote, United States of America, who always opt for democracy. And saying that a president was democratically elected, and that president was taken out of power by force and kept somewhere, and they sit quiet and relax and looking at it as though it is okay. I wonder, I doubt when that democracy is getting to. Does democracy have eyes? Does democracy have a selection of some part of the world to be applied on? Or does democracy is universal? If democracy is universal, there's somewhere, I'm going to be clearly saying it, the Obama administration has something to do. Has something to do. If they put their feet down strongly, if they strongly put their feet down and say, democracy is democracy, wherever democracy is one being instituted, we are for it, and we're going to support whichever country want to implement democracy. If they're backing off in Egypt, that means that the democracy is being selective, and which is a very poor philosophy as far as some African visionaries are concerned. Not me in particular, but some African visionaries are concerned.
Let me take the baton now and hand it over to Mr. Tria, because if you're looking at the situation, John McCain, a U.S. Senator this week also, as the massacre occurred in Egypt, he came out and pointed the finger at the Obama administration, because John McCain, he traveled with a delegation at one point that went to Egypt and openly stood on this platform and told the Egyptian interim government that they see it as a coup. The senators, speaking as a senator, he said this is not coming from the Obama administration, but speaking as the Senate, they have the Senate, they have a foreign relations committee. They went and spoke and said, we see it as a coup, very defiantly. And this is why I want to come to you now, Mr. Chair, because John McCain pointed the finger at the Obama administration, speaking specifically to, was Secretary of State John Kerry, who went to Egypt, and because him on behalf of Obama was reluctant to call it a coup. John McCain says that it's the Obama administration who needs to partly take a portion of the blame. Now, do you agree with Mr. McCain? Is the Obama administration responsible for this massacre of 400 or 2,000 people recently in Egypt?
Yes, I I openly agree the point of view of John McCain. But it should be noted that the legitimate strategy to an emergency is power. Power is the legitimate strategy to an emergency. But for it to be considered that way, there is one question we need to know. What is democracy? Democracy is power to the people, by the people, and
there should be some balloting and the people vote.
Exactly. So we cannot be talking about democracy when we cannot hand the power to the people. And this military that did the coup, they were put in place by who? By the people that are on the street. So you question to know who Egypt belongs to. Egypt does not belong to the military. It belongs to the people that are on the street.
You believe as such?
Yes, of course, because like I said, if you want to talk about democracy, like the Obama administration said after the coup, he declared that that was to preserve democracy. You cannot be talking about democracy when the power is not handed to the population.
But let me just interject there and put this scenario on the table, because democracy follows a system. The people can't just come out and riot as they want, because when the people are part of a system, there's a protocol set in place that the people go to the ballot, they elect, a president is put into place. Now, if the people are disgruntled with the president, there's a system that you must also follow, in which the people must, there should be subpoenas, petitions, it should pass through the parliament. The parliament now brings the president for a system which I believe the term is impeachment.
That is exactly what I was struggling to emphasize on, because Mr. Morsi didn't come to power through a coup. He was democratically elected. So
he should have been democratically voted out.
Yes, he was supposed to be democratically voted out. That is why I said you cannot be talking about democracy when you cannot give power to the people on the street. So what happens in Egypt was not supposed to happen. And Mr. Obama came and boldly addressed the public, saying that that was to preserve democracy. I don't know which type of democracy he was talking about after a coup took place, openly took place. At the end of the day, like I said, most of these issues that are happening within the Arab wars. We've seen so far how many people was killed are being killed every day in Syria. The Europeans are responsible, the Westerners are responsible. We have seen the number of people that were killed in Egypt in just 2 or 3 days. The Obama administration is responsible. But at the end of the day, like I said, again, all these happenings is for economic interest. So you know the number of investment that is in Egypt. So at one point in time, Obama is becoming confused. So now you see the armed forces can no longer control the situation in Egypt. That is why I said the power does not belong to the military, because they can no longer control the situation. They are talking about the fire queue and so on. So the people are on the street. They said if you kill 10,000, 1 million will come to the street.
Really?
So at the end of the day, what will happen will be a civil war. Why should this Arab...
that's what it's disintegrating into.
Why is it that the Arabs are unable to understand themselves? Why is it that they're unable, even Africans, they're unable to understand that these Europeans and these Westerners are truly exploiting them? Truly exploiting them because, like I said, these leaders, they are there always negotiating with the Europeans to remain in power, to fill their bank accounts here and there. So something should be done before it becomes late, because today the situation in Syria has become uncontrollable, and that will be the same thing with Egypt in the days ahead.
Even if you look at the situation in Tunisia right now, Tunisia is struggling to suppress what is happening in Egypt, and slowly, if we're not careful, it's going to start in Tunisia. That is it, and that is where we know the Arab Spring did begin.
Exactly.
Yes, so I mean, unless there's anything else to say, I think just kind of squaring that topic away, we should start looking now at the situation in Mali, because Mali is coming forward now as a model of democracy, ironically, if we want to say not necessarily Arab world, but Islamic world, because when we normally speak of the Arabs, we tend to start thinking of Islam. And Mali, too, went through a situation that, the Tuareg rebellion, led now to French intervention, and recently elections were held, and we have a president, of course, Boubacar Keïta, was peacefully elected in. And we want to look at this clip, which will set the pace for that discourse. Then we'll come back and look at the recent Malian presidential elections.
Well, the former Prime Minister of Mali is now the new president. Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta won Sunday's runoff election after his rival conceded. Official results have yet to be released. Keïta had been the frontrunner in the race. The vote unlocks billions in aid to help the country rebuild after last year's military coup.
The man tipped to win Mali's presidential election has done just that. Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta had already swept the July 28th first round with nearly 40%. Now, even though no official results have yet been released after Sunday's runoff, reports have put the man widely known by his initials, Ibaka, well into the lead.
And that is the report, very clearly. Peaceful election, something that we should all be commending. But I mean, I shouldn't be the one to say it. I want to turn, of course, to our panelist, our senior politician, Mr. Mingole. Looking at that situation in Egypt, I mean, we were first talking about Pan-Africanism, and that has set the pace for this discourse here at Pan-Africa Vision. And what do you think African leaders, African countries can learn from the recent Malian elections? I mean, reflecting right from the coup till now, the military taking over, the French intervention, and then the elections. What do you think everyone should learn?
Well, I think after everything is said and done, it's a good impression, and it's a good lesson. We are learning from Mali that every time there's a will, every time there's a way, and we are willing to follow the way, things can be done on the right way. It's very impressive, and it's a lesson for all African nations. And if I could add something else, for the simple fact that after the elections, the Malians went to the street, jubilating for the fact that the election went smoothly. It's something very, very touchy. Something very, very touchy. Personally, I was touched when I saw them in the TV, without any fighting, without any words, roaming around the street, running with their cars, with their motorcycles, all simply because the elections went smoothly. It's a lesson. And if every African nation can learn to do that, that after war, after coup d'etat, after the intervention of the Westerner, at last, everything went smoothly. And for the simple fact that the opponent came and congratulated Mr. Keïta, it's another thing.
Yes, it was,
it's more of a lesson than anything else. That when you are defeated, you come to your understanding that you have been defeated, you let go and wait for the next turn. So it's a lesson. I wish every African nation could learn from that. Then Africa will be a better nation.
That is it. That is it. You saw it really. Soumaïla Cissé, of course, he wanted to kind of contest, but he came very clear to Keïta and said, okay, you go ahead. But I mean, I like the point that you're bringing out, because there was jubilation and it passed smoothly. And I want to ask you now, Mr. Tria, why? Why has Mali been so unique? It's faced the same upheavals other African countries have, but the elections came, and even with all the fears before it, you saw the president, everything, 2012, 25 candidates said, you just go ahead. Why? I mean, how can we implement that in other African countries? What do you think happened that caused things to move smoothly?
Yeah, uniqueness, like you said, Mr. Ambe, I will tell you that it irks me when I hear people complain that an election was fairly conducted. Why should we be talking about fairness? Because there was no war during an election. Why should we be appreciating Mali because the French came and intervened? When are Africans going to celebrate an economic realization? Why is that not another sign of irresponsibility? So Africans want to tell the Europeans that they cannot do without them. Why should France come and intervene in Mali before there should be peace? In Mali, we talk about the Tuareg rebels. In Libya, we talked about the same thing. Are these rebels not Africans? Are they not our brothers? Can they not sit on a round table and come in with a consensus without bringing in France or America? All the foreign policies America and the French has been applying out of their countries has failed. Look at what is happening in Iraq today. That was caused by George Bush. Look at what is happening in Syria. Go to Libya today and see what is happening. Go to Ivory Coast and see, like I said. So Africans, our African leaders are irresponsible. But if we take decisions and we are really willing, we can do without these Europeans. So we should not celebrate because the French came in. We should not celebrate because an election was fairly conducted. We should instead celebrate one day that we can sit on a round table and know that you are my brother. And know that we can do, we have all the potentials. We have all the raw materials that these Europeans are in need of. So those are still signs of irresponsibility, because when elections takes place in France or in America, you don't see all those signs. They will never tell you in America, Cameroon or Equatorial Guinea or whatsoever, South Africa came and intervened. Why should why should the African Union not supervise our elections and come out with with a result that will satisfy the entire Africans? We saw the Europeans that went to Ivory Coast, and the result that they gave spread to what happened, and we can see today people are still dying, and those are Africans dying and not the Europeans.
Indeed.
And why are they dying? They are dying because they went to Europe, they bought guns, and they came and killed their brothers and sisters with. So something should be done before it is late. So we can do, like Obama said in his campaign speech. So we too, we can, as the Europeans.
Yes, and of course we still have maybe some 50 minutes and one more topic to treat, but just to round up on that situation, we want to look at the fact that if we look at Mali right now, already the new president, Boubacar Keïta, is going to be faced with some hurdles and obstacles. The MNLA, that of course is the Movement for the National Liberation of Azawad, the National Movement for the Liberation of Azawad, has already clearly stated that they will be on the path of the new president. And this is a movement that has been seeking the autonomy. Originally, they wanted the total succession of northern Mali, and this is what actually brought in the problem in which the Malian military, feeling the former President Touré was impotent to challenge and control the situation, the junior militants of the government military stood up to oust him so that they could challenge the MNLA's militant wing in the north and then try to suppress it before the situation has evolved into having the ECOWAS military with the French military, now the transition to the election. So, of course, you are a panelist, as a politician, Mr. Bingole. How do you think Boubacar Keïta has to tackle this problem? How do you think he's going to move at it, or how should he best deal with it?
I think Mr. Keïta, after being the Prime Minister, after being the President of the National Assembly, and after being the founder of the RPM, this guy has a lot of experience under his belt. And with that experience under his belt, he's going to create a dialogue. He's going to bring the MNLA onto the table. And believe me, they're going to hold a very good dialogue. And through that dialogue, the MNLA will succumb to his ideas, to his philosophy, and there will be not a single problem in Mali.
Oh, that's a very powerful prediction. We'll hold that as a prophecy, that maybe if they table a type of federal government in which the Azawad can remain autonomous to a degree, but still included, they can chart a way forward.
Yeah, that's somebody who has been the prime minister. He knows the politics of Mali. He has been the president of National Assembly. He knows everybody in National Assembly. He has been the founder of RPM, one of the political party who has been held strong in Mali. He knows what the politics of the country is. He knows how to get this. He knows their weak points. He knows their strength. And he's going to go about their weak point and assemble with their strength and come out victorious. Oh. It is only difficult if you are not in. Once you are an insider, you know how to solve the problem. He knows the inner problem. He knows why the ML are
the ML is gone.
They know what he knows what they are discontented. Even though while he was the prime minister, he knows their problem. While he was the president of assembly, he knows their problem. So finally, now that he has been elected the boss of the nation, he knows how to deal with them, and believe me, the problem will be solved.
Well, and of course, now to solve our last problem here at Pan-Africa Vision, we want to look at Zimbabwe, which is going to take us to the conclusion of this particular edition of this program. Like we pointed out as we started, the MDC has sent its petition to the Zimbabwean Constitutional Court against the victory of ZANU-PF, and strangely, the Constitutional Court has accepted to look at the petition. So we'll come back, thrash out that topic. Of course, we're going to start with you, Mr. Treya, and that'll take us to the end of this edition of Pan-Africa Vision. We look now at Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe's Constitutional Court must decide if the country will return to the polls within the next 14 days. Lawyers for the Movement for Democratic Change, the MDC, launched a legal challenge to President Robert Mugabe's landslide victory in last week's presidential election. The 15 grounds include alleged bribery, intimidation of voters, and manipulation of the electoral roll. Morgan Tsvangirai is the leader of the MDC and lost out in the race for the presidency, polling 34%. Robert Mugabe, at 89, Africa's oldest ruler, was declared the winner with just over 61% of the votes. His ZANU-PF party has denied any vote rigging. Some Western governments have questioned the vote's credibility. If the court upholds the results, Mugabe, who decried Western countries for the response, must be sworn in within 48 hours of the ruling.
It's an all-out legal and diplomatic offensive to salvage his political career. Tsvangirai faces the Constitutional Court on Saturday, but could do so without key documents. A high court has reserved judgment on whether or not to force the electoral body to release crucial material, including the full presidential results per constituency, copies of the voters' roll used at all polling stations.
There are definitely in our submissions ghosts in those boxes and sealed materials that they do not want us to access.
On the diplomatic front, Tsvangirai will try to isolate Mugabe within the region.
It's very strong, compelling evidence.
Analysts say his party's dossier on the alleged manipulation of the vote could compel SADC to relook at its initial positive review of the elections.
In reality, the GPA process began in 2008 has not been completed. It can only be completed only when there has been a successful election, and therefore it's naive for the SADC to try and claim that the matter is over. They are saddled with it, regrettably.
ZANU-PF believes the SADC summit will be its last hurdle in this regional fight for legitimacy and has rejected further discussions on the political environment.
For the simple reason that the elections were peaceful, there is no violence in the country, so what environment do they want to discuss in Zimbabwe? My understanding was that they were going to be focusing on the DRC and also in Madagascar.
An election that should have ended regional mediation and set Zimbabwe on the path to stability, for now appears to have done anything but that.
And that, as you see it, is the situation in Zimbabwe right now. We see it's still getting hotter and hotter with that political row between the MDC and the ZANU-PF. Now, of course, I want to start with you, Mr. Treya. Looking at the situation, the Constitutional Court, even normally we believe in African politics that the ruling party controls the entire system. But the Constitutional Court has accepted to receive the petition against the victory of ZANU-PF that has led Mugabe into his 7th term. Now, should we be jubilating? That is the question.
We should not be jubilating because the Constitutional Court receiving the petition is a problem. Then being impartial should be another problem. So we saw at which rate Mr. Mugabe won the elections. So it's not even the longevity that matters, like I did mention here at the beginning of this program. So it is the peace that reigns in Zimbabwe. So it's not only the longevity. So Zimbabwe is one of the African countries that is becoming more and more mature.
Yes.
Because politics cannot be taken to the street. Politics is not violence. It's a game of intelligence. So it's an intellectual game. So Mr. Shangirai is somebody that is as well matured. But within this time, it should be questioned about when Mr. Mugabe is going to leave power. It should as well be questioned about the age of Mr. Shangirai. Like I said, youth should take the situations at hand and be able to handle situations in Africa. Because Mugabe is a man of the game. He has everything at his control, actually. But as well, he should tell Zimbabwean when which policy he's having, which vision he's having for his population, and where he is leading the country to. So I said at the beginning, is not the longevity that matters, but I'm happy nothing is taking place in Zimbabwe like violence.
Right.
So that is what the Egyptians should copy. That is what should happen has happened in Mali. That is what should take place in Tunisia and so on.
Yes, but the trouble now, as you're starting to see it also missing in Angola, is that for Shangirai to get the support he needs to remove Mugabe, if the Constitutional Court will first accept that it was a bunk election, we even saw that clip, he's going to need the support of the South African development community. And we know that the MDCC also petitioned Botswana, and Botswana has lobbied the complaint to the SADC, but they've not come forward. But this is the irony. We should note that the SAD first did say the elections were free and fair. We should also note that President Jacob Zuma has also already gone ahead and accepted the victory, and we know that South Africa is really the leader in the forefront of Southern Africa. So is it possible even that Shangirai can get this victory? This is how I should really ask it. Should we realize that Shangirai is not even being supported by the SADC? That's a good way to look at it. Does he have the backing before we saw Mugabe even going ahead to have a victory?
Well, I don't think he has any backing from the southern African development community, because for the simple fact that the South Africans have already congratulated Mugabe, it says this all. They says this all. Even though they said the election was okay, was fine, was peaceful.
Yes, they say free and peaceful.
It was peaceful, but they never mentioned it was fair.
Okay, that's another point.
They never mentioned it was fair.
Yes.
So that's the place that they were in between. They never wanted to give victory to Mugabe, and they never wanted to give a losing portion to the other party. They're in between. But at the end of the day, when the South Africans are congratulating Mugabe, that means that everything is sealed.
Mm-hmm. And that's how we're starting to really look at the situation now. Noting that it's been sealed perhaps, or even let's look at this affirmation of the Zimbabwean election by the SAD amidst all of these irregularities. Now, of course, we have allegations that in the urban areas, we couldn't get voters to come out, which is normally where we see the MDC always takes its momentum.
The open late.
That is it. We had those type of complaints, but incidentally, if you dig a little bit deeper, we had an individual from the Gwanda North, a member of the MDC, Paul Nyathi. He actually explained in his own constitution, people didn't want to vote for the MDC anymore. It had actually lost its support. All of the results also reveal as well that we note that maybe about some 29 members of the MDC actually left the party and decided to run as independent candidates. So we saw that the MDC lost a lot of the support and momentum that it used to have, bringing it to a situation that now we're realizing that we really should say Shangirai is going to have an uphill fight. Now, of course, noting that we are running out of time, we just have some few minutes. We'll take this last statement from Alain Roche, who is also online, and then we will conclude here on Pan-Africa Vision. Now, our consultant from South Africa, Mr. Alain Roche, are you there, sir?
Yes, I'm online.
Yes, sir. We were treating Zimbabwe to a roundup, sir. We could have your commentary very briefly.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. But about Tsvangirai and Mugabe, as I said to you the last time, there are two issues that we need to consider. Mugabe is a leader who has proven beyond reasonable doubt to his people that he is the best when it comes to the interests of his people. Tsvangirai is a leader who from far, helped by the Western medias and international community, has proven to his people that he was the best for them until he was put to exercise the power while he was sharing. Because that is where for the first time, the Zimbabwean people realized who was the real Tsvangirai. And the vote that they did the other day was the real expression of Zimbabwean will. And that was a sanctioned vote against Mr. Tsvangirai. That is why Mugabe has vehemently stood up and said, he don't fear to say, go and commit a suicide when you are going to the court. Because he knows, even if they ask people, blinded eyes, to vote, they will not vote anymore for Tsvangirai. So Tsvangirai does not qualify. He is working for the Western powers in Zimbabwe. And his aim was being unveiled before the election took place. The Western powers thought that by pumping the money into Zimbabwe through Tsvangirai, they will be able to disconnect the people from the reality. But the people of Zimbabwe are very mature, and they did not give a chance for those people to fool them. And today also, Mugabe has realized the best achievement for Zimbabwean people by discovering everything that is underground wealth that can guarantee them richness for the future. So they don't need the West anymore. They have China and they have Africa. With them, they can go a long way. So Tsvangirai will not succeed in whatever he is trying to do.
Well, we do have Mr. Alan Roche's comments to take us to the end of this edition of Pan-Africa Vision. And you see it very clearly. It seems that the ZANU-PF is allowing Tsvangirai to go forward because the people will still speak and they would still make the same voter consensus in the end. And incidentally, if you do your research well, you will find out that actually the West stopped funding Morgan Tsvangirai. He didn't receive the same financial support he expected, and he himself during his campaign was very vocal about complaining and denouncing that the West was not continuing to support him. So the courts will tell him, of course, that that is what the people have said. But we'll continue to monitor all of the news events and bring you our regular roundup every end of the week here at AFRIQUE Media on Pan-Africa Vision. I've been your host, Ambe Fokwa, bringing us to the close of this edition. We were supported very powerfully, of course, by two grandiose individuals, Mr. Trea Shwebu and Mingole Alexander, who contributed. Gentlemen, thank you for participating in our program.
Thank you very much.
Yes, next time we'll love to have you. And, of course, next time, don't change that remote channel or touch that dial. We remain your Pan-African channel, AFRIQUE Media. We have more programs coming up. Thank you.